fantastic to have you all here in Sacramento, where our theme this year is One Movement, Many Voices. How many voices? Well, how about this for a metaphor for how explosive the growth of California's charter schools have been? This year, for the first time ever, California's charter schools have outgrown the Sacramento Convention Center. We had to commandeer the auditorium just to be able to fit everything in. How big has our movement become? Well, this summer, I was traveling with my family to try to get away from it all. And so we decided to go to Alaska, to Wrangell St. Elias National Park, the biggest by geography and least visited of all the national parks in the United States. And we were out on a glacier hike where we only saw 2 groups of hikers the entire day. And as I stepped out of the trail to let the second group of hikers pass, someone says, "Wait a second, you're Jed Wallace." I said, "Yes, I'm Jed Wallace." She said, "I'm Lauren O'Neill. I'm the executive director of Odyssey Charter School in Pasadena." I said, "You don't say." And she says, "Yeah, and while I have your ear, can I tell you about the problems I'm having with my LCAP?" Wherever you go, even out there on the literal or figurative frontier of American life, you will find California charter school folk pulling up a boulder to talk about this thing that we're so passionate about: California's charter schools. I thought I would frame my comments this morning around one of the most oft-repeated stories I heard from my dear friend and old boss, Larry Rosenstock, who's the CEO at High Tech High, the place where I was privileged to work for 5 years. Larry used to say that his grandmother once told him that there are 2 different kinds of people in this world: those that will tell you that there are 2 different kinds of people in this world, and those who won't. And he always used to tell the story as some kind of cautionary tale against presenting the world in dualisms, because those dualisms are almost always false. To wit, I was recently at a national gathering where this question was presented to us: is the charter school movement fundamentally about helping our historically underserved students finally get the education that they deserve? Or is it about helping all students such that our nation will be better positioned to compete in the global economy? Talk about a doozy of a dualism. So to talk about the first side of it, I thought I would share a story from early on in my teaching days. This was at Hooper Avenue Elementary School, the 2,100 student school in South Central, where I spent my 7 years in the classroom. I had arrived early to the parking lot that morning. It was a dark, cold December morning, and suddenly, out of the shadows, stepped a couple, and I recognized them. It was the Lunas, Christian's mom and dad. I had had Christian in my class. There he is, the small guy in the red shirt in the first picture, or he's the smallest boy in the gray sweatshirt in the corner. We did a big project on Diego that year. There I am, as typical, lying down on the job. But Christian's transition to middle school had not been a smooth one. He had been repeatedly beaten up, and so Christian did something stupid. He took a penknife to school, and the penknife violated the district's zero tolerance policy, and so they were going to expel him as an 11-year-old. And his parents didn't know what to do, so they came to visit me. And so began one of the big sagas of my teaching days, trying to keep Christian from being kicked out of school. And the hearings went on for months until we finally found this arcane detail in state law which said that it was illegal for a school district to expel a student under the age of 12. And so the district had to make an in-district expulsion for Christian, where he got his own classroom and his own teacher, who turned out to be a phenomenal educator. And during his 18 months in that setting, Christian learned more than he learned in all of the rest of his years in Los Angeles Unified School District. A few years later, Christian and I got together and we decided to write a screenplay about our story together. And I remember the afternoon when Christian came up with the title. He said we should call it The Teacher y su Maestro. The teacher and his teacher. Because the further that we got into our friendship, a friendship that has continued to this very day, the more we have seen that I have learned at least as much from Christian and his family as they've ever learned from me. And at the very top of the list, it's appalling how our public schools can treat families like the Lunas. It is appalling that the best educational opportunity they ever found for their son was some perverse exception to the rule. And have California's charter schools made a difference? You're darn right they have. The Credo report, affiliated with Stanford University, came out with a study last year about the performance of Los Angeles charter schools. And it found that for Latino children in poverty, on average, they are experiencing 58 days of extra learning in English language arts and 115 days of extra learning in math. What Christian could only access as a perverse exception to the rule 20 years ago, now 70,000 Latino children in poverty are accessing every year as a rule through Los Angeles charter schools. So do charter schools have a lot to say about the first side of the dualism? You bet we do. That's why we're so excited this year to have a big part of our programming focusing on the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. But here in California, we actually have a longer anniversary to celebrate. The Mendez case. The Mendezes were in Orange County during the World War II years, and they absolutely refused to send their Mexican-American kids to the segregated schools that the district had made for them. And so, on March 2nd, 1945, 70 years ago this month, the Mendezes filed the case which ultimately ended all segregation in California schools. And it sparked the partnership and the imagination of Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP to file the Brown case at a national level. And by the time that Thurgood Marshall got there, Earl Warren, the California governor, who passed the desegregation legislation here in California, had been appointed to be the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The stage was set. Something monumental was ready to occur, something huge. Just like, in my view, something monumental, something huge is happening in California's charter schools. We have 550,000 kids in charter schools. We have over 1,130 charter schools in almost all communities in the state of California. We're adding 30 or 40,000 kids per year. We have a strengthening of our academic sector that is like raising eyebrows, due in big part to our new assertiveness to close underperforming charter schools. We've got great innovations in special education happening in charter schools. We've got a range of providers, CMOs, independent study schools, blended learning, conversions, you name it, as strong as you'll find anywhere in the nation. Our back office providers, our law firms, and our other supporters are as strong as you'll find anywhere. And finally, we have charter school folk coming out of the woodwork in the thousands to get involved in advocacy. This is California's charter school movement, about a decade in front of the nation, in the same way that Mendez was about a decade in front of Brown. Folks, California is the Mendez of the national charter school movement. What happens here will happen everywhere. And that's why it's so important that we get it right. Because we know that the charter school movement is the best chance, it may be the only chance, to ultimately make sure that our underserved students are finally given the education they deserve. And as amazing as it would be if that was like all that our movement is about, the fact is we have just as much to offer on the other side of the question as well. That's why I'm equally thrilled that another major theme for for our conference this week is to invite Amanda Ripley to talk about her latest book, The Smartest Kids in the World. It's a look at how our schools are performing viewed through the experience of exchange students. It so happens that one of my wife's colleagues, Phil, who is here with us today, he has retired, and his volunteer work in his retirement is to help place exchange students in Sacramento schools. And Phil has decided that I'm something of an education dignitary or something, and so he brings the kids by to have lunch with me. And so I always ask the same question. If, in terms of academic rigor, you would rate your school at home a 10, what would you rate the American high school that you're attending right now? And folks, we're not talking about high schools in the inner parts of Sacramento. We're talking about our high schools in the most affluent parts of the region. What do you think the answers are that I get? 1s and 2s and 3s. The boy from Jordan who told me that his American friends think that he's some kind of math genius, and yet he doesn't have the heart to tell them that back home, he's actually in the bottom third of his class. The kid from Cameroon who said something similar about science, where he didn't want to tell folks that he's not actually in the most advanced science class back home. Or look at the ETS study that came out just last month, talking about how American millennials, our generation from 18 to 34, are doing. They are on a trajectory for being the most educated but least skilled generation of American young people relative to other countries. In the 22 countries that were profiled, only 2 countries, Spain and Italy, scored lower in basic literacy. And in basic numeracy and problem solving in technology-rich environments, the American young people scored dead last. This is the state of America's high schools. And are California's charter schools doing something about this? You're darn right we are. Many of our charter schools, in terms of A through G course completion, are generating 2, 3, 4 times the rate as traditional public schools, depending on where you live in California. Or our UC admission rates are 50% higher coming from charter schools than they are from traditional public schools. Or some of our individual school stories. Think about who has won the academic decathlon for 3 years in a row. It's Granada Hills Charter High School. And who finally knocked him off in year 4? El Camino Real, another California charter school. And look at the dozens of other charter high schools in California that are routinely recognized by national publications to be among our most rigorous programs. So yes, charter schools are doing a great job on this side as well. But this answer that we've thus far put forward, that we're neither this thing nor that thing, but we're kind of both, is really not satisfactory either, because the whole frame is wrong. Because it is my view that California's charter schools are actually trying to do something even bigger. Because if we look globally, we see that the gulf between the haves and the have-nots is widening. And we see that technology is changing in ever faster ways. In terms of manual labor, manual jobs, we're not so far away from the day when we may not need one person to assemble a car, much less drive a car, or one person to pick an entire field of strawberries, much less all the fields that you find on the 599 corridor. And we don't think our schools need to be able to innovate quickly to keep up. And yet what we find, not just in the United States, but across the globe, is that public education is entrenched in the most calcified, resistant bureaucracies you'll find anywhere in modern life. You think it's hard to get a charter school started in Morgan Hill? And it is very hard. But try doing something innovative in Tel Aviv. Try and do something bold in Oaxaca. Try and do something out of the box in Calcutta. It would seem to me that our role here in California is to demonstrate that we can free public education from this dysfunctional bureaucracy so that it can innovate and improve more rapidly, so that ultimately billions of students in the planet can be better served. Ultimately, then, not a Mendez for the nation, but a Mendez for the world. But the thing is, this work is incredibly difficult to do. This is how Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, described it in a piece that he wrote in the New York Times in December. He said, "There have grown up powerful interest groups that can stand in the way of substantial and necessary reform. Anyone who has ever tried to reform an education system, for example, knows how tough and bitter the struggle is. The bureaucracy fights change. The teachers' union fights change. The public gets whipped up to defeat change even when it is in the public's own interest. The nearest I ever came to losing my job as prime minister was not over policies of war and peace, but over education reforms." Think about that. The most difficult policy work happening in the planet today is happening in the area where the California charter school movement is trying to make its contribution. And so the question then becomes, what is it that makes us different? How are we unique? How are we going to get something done that even Tony Blair, one of the most adept politicians of the age, couldn't even get done? Well, that's the secret that I want to share with you guys this morning. So I ask you to pull up a boulder for the second part of my comments today, because the boulder is where you find the secret. Lauren O'Neill, she brought it back from Wrangell. Do you remember? The secret to the long-term transformational success of the charter school movement is LCAP. No, not that LCAP. Not local control accountability plan, the new compliance document that is used for our new funding system here in California. No, our LCAP. And it does start with L. Anybody have a guess? Leadership is a good guess. Maybe some people have suggested local. I had a friend say, is it Larry? As much as Larry's awesome, no. The secret to our success, of course, begins with learning. Lots and lots of learning. And we know it, and even our adversaries know it. A few weeks ago, I was in a public debate against our usual suspect adversaries. And here is the first argument that they made against why charter schools should even exist. They cited a study from Credo, the Stanford group, from 2009 that said that charter schools academically are not doing any better than traditional public schools at a national level. Which I then said, well, it's now 2014, and that same group that you so respect, that you quote and fawn over, has actually issued a number of reports since then showing that the charter school sector is definitely improving nationally. And we have additional data here in California showing that the story's gotten even better. And if you're looking at Oakland, which is where I was for the debate, I mean, there's no question whatsoever, Oakland schools are absolutely nailing it. So you know what they said back to me at that point? Well, everybody knows those stupid test scores don't matter anyway. But they know, people know, parents know. This is why we have over 90,000 kids on waiting lists in the state of California. This is why the public is embracing us. This is why we have philanthropists lining up to support us. But the sad thing is that, as amazing as that is, learning in and of itself is not enough. Because what happens when you start generating results that are far better than what the traditional public school system has been able to do for generations? That's when the backlash comes. Like what happened to the public school choice schools in Los Angeles, the program where charter schools were allowed to compete with traditional public schools to operate new programs in newly opening buildings. What were the API scores a few years later? The charter schools, which had accepted attendance boundaries and were inarguably serving the exact same kids as the district schools were scoring on average 100 API points higher. And what does the district do? What does the district do? Open up the program and let more charters participate? No. They sunset the program altogether. So, if learning's not enough, what is going to be making us different? Well, let's come on back over to the Boulder, where Lauren and I are still talking through our LCAP. We get past L, we come to CA. California, calcium. CA stands for collective action. If it weren't for our movement's ability to generate very high levels of collective action, we would never be able to defend ourselves from the attacks which keep coming our way. Like last year, in assembly education, we had an absolutely dreadful bill pass. We had AB 1531, which would have attacked our autonomy in fundamental ways. It would have said that school district authorizers would have been able to appoint 50% or more of the board members on all of our charter schools across the state of California. I mean, think about that. School districts having more than 50% control over absolutely everything we do. That's what we had before the charter school movement was passed in 1992. And yet it got out of committee. What happened, though, right away? In a matter of days, not even a week later, we had 75 teachers, parents, school leaders, and other supporters of charter schools protesting at the assembly member's office who had been the swing vote in the committee. A couple days after that, we had a petition signed by 1,000 parents submitted to that same assembly member's office. A couple days later, up here at the Capitol, we had over 10,000 emails, phone calls, faxes, you name it, coming into the Capitol building. And so a week later, in the next step of the legislative process, the bill died. If it weren't for our ability to generate huge levels of collective action, our movement would be in great peril. But the problem is, again, collective action, even with learning, is not enough. Because what happens when you start getting thousands of people active on your issues? Some elected officials start digging in their heels, like happened at the West Contra Costa Unified School District. This is a place that has a history of denying many high-quality charter applications coming to the district. And get this is a district that has a local parcel tax that is generating hundreds of dollars per year to local schools. And the charter schools in the district serve a higher percentage of African American, Latino, and low-income kids. And the district still will not share a penny of that parcel tax with the charter schools. I mean, just step back and think about that for a second. 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, are standards of common decency evolving, and this district won't give funding to charter schools serving our most vulnerable students? So what do? Well, we do the CCSA thing. I mean, we're suing them, and we've had a couple of good days in court here lately, right? And we've had hundreds of parents coming to school board meetings, right? And we've overturned every bad decision on appeal. You think the district then gets it? Like, maybe we need to stop doing this? What do? Last February, they put onto the ballot a new facilities bond that again left out thousands of charter school students. So what is it? What's the last piece that we need to add? We're coming back to the Boulder one last time. We've made it through L. We've made it through CA. The last piece of our LCAP. Anybody have a guess about the P? It's a dirty word. Very impolite in certain settings. Some people refer to it as the P-bomb. It's politics. If it were not for our movement's ability to take its emerging grassroots strength and put it to work at the ballot box, we ultimately would not be able to prevail. Like what happened at West Contra Costa, our sister organization, CCSA Advocates, it came out in very strong opposition to that facilities bond. And at the May election, defeated it handily. Now, do we like stopping resources from coming to public education? Absolutely not. Would we have much preferred to have been working with the district to try to pass something that fully includes charter schools? Yes. But do we have any problems whatsoever stopping new revenue streams that do not fully and fairly include charter schools? No, we do not. And school districts are starting to pay attention. Look at how many school districts included charter schools in their facilities bond in the November elections just a few months ago. And as excited as we are about this work that we're doing on the initiative side, it's actually our candidate work that we're maybe even more excited about. Because the further we get into this work, the more that we realize we've got some very special assets, folks. We've got a message that resonates with voters. We've got these great new candidates, charter school leaders and board members and charter school parents who are among the most trusted new candidates running for office. We've got a great universe of voters. We've got hundreds of thousands of parents who are now documented in many different elections happening across the state to be turning out in higher percentages than other registered voters. And finally, we've got the volunteers. We got the phone bankers and the canvassers that are turning our get out the vote activities into more effective efforts than almost any other field campaign you can currently find in the state of California. And people are looking at these assets and seeing the results that they're generating, and they're saying, my goodness, is there some big new question that's presenting itself? Is there some kind of big new referendum? We, of course, refer to it as our big new ref, as in Ref Rodriguez. The founder and incredible educator who's done so much work at Puck Charter Schools in Los Angeles, who's now running for office for the school board in Los Angeles, and who is running against someone who has voted against charter schools on 89% of issues, and who is supported by our adversaries at a national, state, and local level. And in spite of it, Ref came in first during the primary, and we think that if we keep running this play as effectively for the next couple months, he's got a very good chance of winning it all in May. Just like we had 35 other CCSA-endorsed school board candidates who won in November, including two in West Contra Costa Unified, who we hope will help us set a completely more constructive tone within that district. So what do we call this cadre of 35 people who are now elected and charter school friendly? Do we call them our collective refs? No. We call them our collective Warrens. Our Earl Warrens, who are doing great work where they currently are, supporting charter schools, but who ultimately will also progress to even higher office and higher level of influence. What is it about our movement that makes us different? What is the thing that allows us to get done what Tony Blair could not? It's that our movement, like the effort to desegregate our schools, we have LCAP. We have learning, which I would suggest is the equivalent of having the Mendezes. Being on the right side of history, making hundreds of thousands of students and families' lives better. It's the moral authority that any movement needs to be transformational. We have collective action, which I would posit is the equivalent of having Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP and hundreds of thousands of people willing to march. It is the activism that any movement needs to be ultimately transformational. And finally, we have P, which I would suggest is the equivalent of having Earl Warren, our friends in the pipeline who will progress to other levels of influence and be there to write the new rules and usher in the new age. Ultimately, charter schools will be able to do what other reform efforts have not been able to do, because when we have our final day in court, we will be on both sides of the bench. But to make that day happen as fast as possible, to make sure that we lose as few generations of students in the interim. Everybody in this room has got to do our part. Everybody in our movement has to. And so that means, in addition to all the phenomenal things that you're doing with kids in schools and communities, I ask you also to save an increment for advocacy, to do all the various things that Myrna asked you to do on the C3 side, the Capital Advocacy Leaders Program, being involved with Advocacy Day. These things really matter. Or just make a video and submit it to next year's video contest. Speak from the heart about what the charter school movement has meant in your life. Or if what you're passionate about is politics, well then volunteer for CCSA Advocates, where you can be a part of our political council, where you can get involved with these local PACs, and maybe one day you'll actually find your inner ref and run for office yourself. Our role here at CCSA and CCSA Advocates is to be that key partner that empowers you to do these things. Our role is to be there for you when the moments of need arise. Because yes, when you are doing profound things, it is inevitable that dark moments will occur. Moments when you will feel like you are in the shadows of the parking lot on a dark, cold December morning, when you feel like people have their sights on expelling you. CCSA is supposed to be there for you then. We are to have been there long enough before that so that the trust is built up. We are supposed to be there with you at every hearing thereafter, side by side with you. And ultimately, we're supposed to be there with you, helping you find that arcane detail, which will keep the wolves at bay and will allow you to stay on stride. And if ever we here at CCSA begin talking a little bit like teachers, maybe it's because we've picked up a few things along the way about advocacy and support, but we do so never forgetting for 1 second who the true maestros of this movement are. And that is our people in local communities across this state, teachers, parents, school leaders, board members, everyone doing the work to propel our movement on to other levels of impact. People that do this remarkable job of both teaching and empowering others while never forgetting that we have as much to learn as anyone else. A hallmark of our movement that is never on prouder display than when we get together for our annual conference. People coming together, teaching, sharing lessons learned, and reconnecting with people, looking at how far we've made, being inspired by how much further we have to go. But every hour here, soaking up as much learning as we possibly can from these incredible people who have gravitated in such stunning numbers to this movement that we so cherish. As Christian identified it all those years ago, that special bond that forms between people who are teaching and learning simultaneously. Teachers y maestros, forging our path together. Thank you so much for sharing your path with us. Thank you for what you are doing for California's charter schools. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a phenomenal week.